My name is Rebecca, and at 28 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing outside Sacred Heart Church in my rehearsal dress with mascara running down my face. My phone keeps buzzing with 47 missed calls, but I can't bring myself to answer any of them. Just 3 hours ago, I was humiliated in front of 200 guests at what should have been my wedding rehearsal dinner. But here's the thing, in exactly 72 hours, I'll be married to someone completely different, someone my ex never saw coming. Before I tell you how I ended up marrying a billionaire 3 days after being dumped, let me know where you're watching from. Like and subscribe. If you've ever had your heart broken and came back stronger, trust me, this story will show you that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best plot twists. Marcus and I had been together for 3 years, and everyone thought we were the perfect couple. We met at a charity gala for childhood cancer research, where I was working as the event coordinator. I remember seeing him across the ballroom in his navy suit, talking animatedly with donors about sustainable technology. He worked as CFO at a promising tech startup called Innovate Tech, and he was always talking about making it big, about how we'd have this incredible life once his equity paid off. Our life together seemed like something out of a magazine. We had this beautiful apartment in downtown Chicago with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Millennium Park. Saturday mornings meant coffee at our favorite local roastery, and Sunday afternoons were reserved for the farmers market in Lincoln Park, where we'd buy fresh flowers and pretend to cook elaborate meals that usually ended with us ordering Thai food instead. My mother, who had been pressuring me about grandchildren since I turned 25, was absolutely over the moon when Marcus finally proposed. She called every relative within hours, proudly announcing that her daughter was finally getting married to such a successful man. But looking back now, I can see the signs I ignored. The last 6 months had been different. Marcus started working late almost every night, claiming there were urgent investor meetings and critical financial reports that couldn't wait. His phone would buzz constantly during dinner, and he'd step out to take calls on our balcony, speaking in hushed tones I couldn't quite hear through the glass doors. When I asked about it, he'd kiss my forehead and tell me he was doing all this for our future, that once this big deal went through, we'd be set for life. I threw myself into wedding planning with an intensity that I now realize was my way of avoiding the growing distance between us. Every detail had to be perfect, from the shade of blush pink for the bridesmaids' dresses to the specific variety of peonies in my bouquet. My parents, generous as always, had contributed $45,000 for the wedding. My father, who owned a small construction company, had been saving for this day since I was born. The venue alone cost $15,000, a historic ballroom with crystal chandeliers and marble floors where Chicago's elite had celebrated for over a century. The Drake Hotel's grand ballroom was transformed for our rehearsal dinner. Burgundy linens covered round tables for 10 each centerpiece, featuring white roses and golden candles. The wedding party table stretched along the front of the room, elevated slightly so everyone could see us. My bridesmaids were my carefully chosen inner circle. Jessica, my best friend since sophomore year at Northwestern, who knew every secret I'd ever had. Amy, my cousin, who was more like a sister who'd spent summers with me at our grandmother's lake house. Lisa, my college roommate, who'd held my hair back during finals week and celebrated with me when I landed my first real job. Marcus's groomsmen seemed nervous from the moment they arrived. Derek, his best friend since high school and his chosen best man, kept avoiding eye contact with me. When I tried to talk to him about the bachelor party plans, he mumbled something about keeping it simple and practically ran away to the bar. The other groomsmen guys from his startup and college fraternity huddled in corners, having whispered conversations that stopped whenever I walked by. That morning, I had found something odd while moving Marcus's car so the florist could access the garage. A small diamond earring, definitely not mine, was wedged between the passenger seat and the console. When I showed it to him, he barely glanced at it before saying it must be his sister Caroline's from when he drove her to the airport last month. I wanted to believe him so badly that I pushed down the voice in my head, reminding me that Caroline lived in Seattle and hadn't visited since Christmas. The rehearsal at the church that afternoon went smoothly enough. We practiced our walks down the aisle, figured out the timing for the music, and Father Thomas guided us through the ceremony order. Marcus seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone, even when Father Thomas was speaking directly to him. When I touched his arm and asked if everything was okay, he gave me that same distant smile he'd been wearing for months, and said he was just dealing with some last-minute work issues. As we arrived at the Drake for the dinner, I noticed Marcus texting frantically in the car. His jaw was clenched, and when I asked who he was messaging, he snapped at me for the first time in our relationship, telling me to give him some space. I felt tears prick my eyes, but told myself it was just pre-wedding jitters. Every couple went through this, right? The stress of planning such a big event could make anyone edgy. The rehearsal dinner started at 4 in the afternoon, but Marcus arrived 15 minutes late, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool September weather. He mumbled an apology about traffic, but his car keys were shaking in his hand as he handed them to the valet. I noticed his shirt was untucked in the back, something the usually meticulous Marcus would never normally allow. As guests found their seats and waiters poured champagne for the toasts, I spotted a woman I didn't recognize sitting at a back table. She wore a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than my entire wedding dress, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled in a sleek bob. She was beautiful in that intimidating way that made you immediately conscious of your own appearance. When I asked my mother if she knew who that was, she shrugged and assumed it was someone from Marcus's company. The dinner progressed with the usual rehearsal dinner traditions. My father stood first, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he held his champagne glass. His voice thick with emotion, he talked about the little girl who used to help him in his workshop, who grew up to be a woman who made him proud every single day. He welcomed Marcus to our family, saying he couldn't have chosen a better man for his daughter if he'd tried. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, and I saw several guests reaching for tissues. Jessica went next, telling embarrassing stories about our college adventures, but ending with how she'd never seen me as happy as I was with Marcus. Amy shared memories from our childhood, and even Marcus's mother, typically reserved and formal, expressed her joy at gaining a daughter she already loved. Through it all, Marcus kept checking his phone under the table, his leg bouncing nervously. The woman in the cream suit never touched her food, just sat there watching everything unfold like she was waiting for something. Then just as the main course was being served, Marcus suddenly stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He picked up his knife and began tapping it against his champagne glass. The room fell silent, everyone assuming he wanted to make a romantic toast to his bride-to-be. My heart swelled with love, thinking maybe he'd been nervous about expressing his feelings in front of everyone. But the words that came out of his mouth shattered my world into pieces I'm still finding today. He cleared his throat twice, before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper at first. He said he had something important to tell everyone, something that couldn't wait another day. My first thought was that maybe he'd gotten a promotion or we were moving for his job. Then he said the words that changed everything. He'd been having an affair for 8 months. 8 months. That was almost since the moment we'd gotten engaged. The woman's name was Victoria Chen, and as if on cue, the blonde in the cream suit stood up from her back table. She was a senior executive at Tech Venture Capital, the firm that had been considering investing in Marcus's startup. The room gasped collectively as she walked forward, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown to disaster. But the real shock, the thing that made my mother drop her champagne glass, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces, was when Marcus announced that Victoria was pregnant. 4 months pregnant. My mind did the math automatically. 4 months meant she got pregnant while I was choosing wedding invitations. While I was trying on wedding dresses, she was taking pregnancy tests. While I was tasting wedding cakes, they were planning a future that didn't include me. Marcus continued talking, his words coming faster now, like he wanted to get it all out before anyone could stop him. He said he was calling off our wedding, that he'd already contacted the venue to cancel, that he would be marrying Victoria instead. The cruelest part was what he said next, that he'd brought Victoria to the rehearsal dinner because he thought it would be good for everyone to meet her, since she'd be part of his life going forward. My sister Emma, who'd been quietly sitting with her husband at a nearby table, suddenly stood up and grabbed her wine glass, ready to throw it at Marcus. Her husband had to physically restrain her while she screamed about what kind of monster does this at a rehearsal dinner. My father's face had turned purple with rage, his hands clenched into fists on the table. But what hurt even more was when Marcus's parents stood up and his mother calmly said they'd known for 3 weeks. They'd known and helped him plan this public humiliation because they thought it would be easier than dealing with it privately. Then Jessica stood up, tears streaming down her face, and admitted she'd seen them together 3 months ago at a restaurant downtown. She'd confronted Marcus, but he'd begged her not to tell me, promised it was ending, swore he loved me, and just needed time to fix his mistake. The betrayal from my best friend, even though she thought she was protecting me, felt like another knife in my back. The room erupted into chaos. My relatives shouted at Marcus's family, his groomsmen tried to defend him, while my bridesmaids formed a protective circle around me. Victoria stood there with her hand on her still flat stomach, a small smile playing on her lips like she'd won some prize. 200 guests witnessed my complete humiliation, some recording on their phones, others calling for security, everyone talking at once in a roar of anger and shock. But I couldn't hear any of it. The sound in my ears was like being underwater, everything muffled and distant. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking, and walked out of that ballroom with as much dignity as I could muster. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I just walked out into the Chicago evening while behind me, the rehearsal dinner descended into the kind of chaos that would be gossiped about for years. By 11 that night, I found myself at Lake Michigan's shore, still wearing my pale pink rehearsal dinner dress that I'd bought specifically for this occasion. The early fall air was cold against my skin, but I couldn't feel it through the numbness that had settled over me like a blanket. I sat on a bench near Oak Street Beach, the city lights reflecting on the dark water, turning the engagement ring on my finger over and over, while contemplating throwing it into the lake. 3 years of my life gone. The future I'd planned vanished. The man I thought I knew a stranger. The family I was about to join complicit in my humiliation. I pulled out my phone to see 47 missed calls from various family members, 12 from Marcus and 1 text from Victoria that simply read that she was sorry I had to find out this way, but love couldn't be controlled. I almost laughed at the audacity. That's when I heard footsteps on the path behind me. A man's voice, deep and concerned, asked if I was all right. I turned to see someone in an expensive charcoal suit, clearly custom-tailored from the perfect fit. Even in my devastated state, I noticed his presence, the kind that comes from genuine confidence, not the fake bravado Marcus always tried to project. He was maybe 35, with dark hair, slightly silvered at the temples, and eyes that held genuine concern. He introduced himself as Alexander Sterling, CEO of Sterling Technologies, and my heart sank even further. He'd been at the rehearsal dinner as a potential investor in Marcus's startup. He'd witnessed my complete humiliation along with everyone else. I waited for the pity, the awkward condolences, but instead he asked if he could sit down, and when I nodded, he left a respectful distance between us on the bench. We ended up talking for 3 hours as the city quieted around us. He told me he'd followed me out because he wanted to make sure I was safe, that nobody should be alone after what had happened. When I laughed bitterly and asked if he'd enjoyed the show, he said something that surprised me. He said Marcus was a fool not just for what he'd done, but for how he'd done it. That anyone who could betray someone so publicly, so cruelly, was showing exactly who they were, and that person wasn't someone he'd ever do business with. Alexander shared his own story as the moon rose higher over the lake. 5 years ago, his wife of 7 years had stolen proprietary technology from his first company and sold it to their biggest competitor. She'd been having an affair with their rival CEO, feeding him information for over a year. The betrayal had cost him everything: his company, his fortune, most of his friends who chose sides. But instead of letting it destroy him, he'd used it as fuel. He rebuilt from nothing, creating Sterling Technologies, which was now worth 10 times what his first company had ever been. He told me about the months of anger and despair, about wanting revenge, about the nights he'd stood on his apartment balcony, wondering if success was worth pursuing anymore. But then he'd realized something crucial. The best revenge wasn't destroying them, it was building something so magnificent that their betrayal became nothing more than a footnote in his success story. His ex-wife's new company had failed within 2 years, while Sterling Technologies had just gone public with a $2 billion valuation. When I asked why he was really at the rehearsal dinner, he revealed something that made me laugh for the first time that night. Marcus had been desperately pitching him for investment capital for 6 months. Email after email, call after call, even showing up at Sterling Technologies uninvited. Alexander had finally agreed to attend the dinner as a courtesy, but he'd already decided not to invest. Something about Marcus had always seemed off to him, too eager, too willing to say whatever he thought people wanted to hear. Alexander pulled out his business card, but not to offer condolences or pity. Sterling Technologies needed a new public relations director, someone who understood event planning, crisis management, and brand building. He'd done his research before considering Marcus's pitch and knew about my background, my degree in communications, my work with major nonprofits in Chicago. The position would pay $250,000 a year to start with equity options and full benefits. I laughed, actually laughed, and told him I couldn't possibly think about work right now. My life had just exploded in the most public way possible. He stood up, then straightening his suit jacket, and said something I'll never forget. Sometimes the best revenge is massive success, and sometimes the best time to start over is when you have nothing left to lose. Before he walked away, he mentioned that Sterling Technologies was having their annual gala in Las Vegas in 3 days. 500 of the biggest names in tech would be there. Potential clients, investors, industry leaders. He invited me to attend as his personal guest, suggesting that a fresh start in a new city might be exactly what I needed. He left his card on the bench beside me and walked away without pressuring me for an answer. I sat there for another hour, turning his card over in my fingers. Alexander Sterling, CEO, Sterling Technologies. The card was heavy, expensive, with raised lettering that caught the light from the street lamps. On the back, he'd written his personal cell phone number and just 2 words that would change everything. Why not? The next morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house to 67 text messages. Marcus had sent 23, ranging from apologies to accusations that I was being dramatic by leaving. Victoria had sent 3 more, explaining that she was a woman who went after what she wanted and that I should respect that. The wedding vendors were calling about cancellation policies, deposits that wouldn't be returned, bills that still needed to be paid. $45,000 gone, just like my relationship. My mother brought me coffee and sat on the edge of my bed, her eyes red from crying. She kept apologizing as if any of this was her fault, saying she should have seen the signs, should have protected me better. My father was downstairs on the phone with his lawyer, exploring options for recovering some of the wedding costs, but I couldn't focus on any of it. My mind kept drifting to that business card on my nightstand. Jessica arrived at noon with 2 bottles of wine and a stack of moving boxes. Her guilt was written all over her face, and she couldn't stop apologizing for not telling me about seeing Marcus with Victoria. She thought she was protecting me, thought maybe it was a one-time mistake, thought Marcus would come to his senses. I forgave her because I understood. We all want to believe the best about the people we love, even when evidence suggests otherwise. As we packed up my apartment, we found evidence of Marcus's deception everywhere. There were credit card statements hidden in his desk drawer showing $30,000 in debt I knew nothing about. Restaurant charges at places he'd claimed were business dinners, jewelry purchases. I'd never received hotel bookings on days he was supposedly at conferences. Jessica found his laptop open and discovered he had active profiles on 3 different dating apps, all showing him as single, all with recent activity. The last login was yesterday, the morning of our rehearsal dinner. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Alexander, simple and direct. The offer stands. Private jet leaves at 3 from Signature Aviation at O'Hare. No pressure, just possibility. I showed it to Jessica, expecting her to tell me I was crazy for even considering it. Instead, she grabbed my shoulders and asked me what I had to lose. Marcus had taken everything already, my dignity, my future, my faith in love. Maybe a complete change was exactly what I needed. I made the decision in an instant, the kind that changes your whole life trajectory. I packed my best professional clothes, the designer dresses I'd bought for our honeymoon, my laptop and the portfolio of PR campaigns I'd created over the years. Jessica drove me to the private airport, both of us laughing at the absurdity of it all. Yesterday, I was supposed to be getting married to a mid-level executive with delusions of grandeur. Today, I was boarding a private jet with a billionaire CEO. The Signature Aviation Terminal was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. No security lines, no crowds, just elegant lounges and personal service. Alexander was already there reading the Wall Street Journal on a leather sofa. He stood when he saw me, and his smile was warm, genuine, without any trace of pity. He'd brought a contract for the PR director position, ready for my review, showing he was serious about the job offer, and this wasn't just charity. The private jet was a Gulfstream G650, Jeunesse Indépendante 50, all cream leather and polished wood. As we settled into seats that were more comfortable than my living room furniture, Alexander poured 2 glasses of champagne. To new beginnings, he toasted, and I found myself believing it might actually be possible. During the flight, we discussed business strategies, and I pitched him ideas for Sterling Technologies' PR campaigns that made his eyes light up with interest. I impressed myself with my ideas about rebranding tech companies, to appeal to younger demographics about using social media influencers in ways his current team hadn't considered, about humanizing the tech industry through storytelling. He took notes on his tablet, asking intelligent questions that challenged me to think deeper. For 3 hours, I forgot about Marcus, about the humiliation, about the wreckage of my life in Chicago. We landed in Las Vegas as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink. A Bentley waited on the tarmac to take us to the Wynn, where Alexander had booked me a penthouse suite. Not just a room, but 2,500 square feet of luxury, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Strip. When I tried to protest that it was too much, he simply said that his PR director deserved the best and I should get used to it. That evening, he took me to dinner at Joel Robuchon, the 3 Michelin star restaurant at the MGM Grand. Over a meal that cost more than $2,000, with wine pairings I couldn't even pronounce, we talked about everything except Marcus and the disaster I'd left behind. Alexander told me about building his first company in his garage, about the nights he'd slept on his office floor, about the sweet taste of success after everyone had counted him out. Then over dessert, he told me something that made my blood boil and my heart race simultaneously. Marcus had called him that morning trying to do damage control. He'd claimed I was unstable, that I'd overreacted to a simple disagreement, that the scene at the rehearsal dinner was my fault. He'd actually tried to convince Alexander that investing in his company would be a mistake if I was involved in any capacity. Marcus had tried to sabotage my future even after destroying my present. Alexander's response had been to increase my starting salary by $50,000 and add a signing bonus. He said anyone Marcus was that desperate to discredit must be exceptionally valuable. The gala tomorrow night would be my first test, my chance to prove that Marcus's loss would be Sterling Technologies' gain. 500 of the most powerful people in tech would be there. And Alexander wanted me by his side, not as decoration, but as his secret weapon. The next morning, Alexander sent a full styling team to my suite. Hairstylists, makeup artists, and a personal shopper arrived with $20,000 worth of designer gowns for me to choose from. There were options from Valentino Versace and Dior, each more stunning than the last. I selected a red Valentino gown that hugged my curves perfectly, with a daringly low back and a slit that showed just enough leg to be interesting without being inappropriate. The stylist pinned my hair in an elegant updo that showcased diamond earrings Alexander had sent as a welcome gift to the company. The makeup artist gave me a classic look with a bold red lip that matched the dress perfectly. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the woman who'd been humiliated at her rehearsal dinner. I saw someone powerful, confident, ready to conquer the world. The gala was held at the Encore's grand ballroom, transformed into a tech wonderland, with LED displays showing Sterling Technologies' innovations. Ice sculptures shaped like circuit boards held seafood towers, and bartenders created smoking cocktails with liquid nitrogen. The moment we arrived, photographers started snapping pictures. Alexander Sterling had arrived with an unknown woman, and everyone wanted to know who I was. Alexander introduced me as his new PR director, and I immediately went to work. I charmed investors from Silicon Valley, discussing market trends and disruption strategies I'd researched on the plane. I pitched partnership ideas to 3 major tech firms, landing verbal agreements for collaboration worth potentially millions. I worked the room like I'd been doing this my whole life, my communication skills and genuine enthusiasm winning over skeptics who'd initially dismissed me as just another pretty face. By midnight, I'd collected 47 business cards from CEOs and CTOs who wanted to discuss further opportunities. Alexander watched from across the room as I explained Sterling Technologies' new AI initiative to a group of Japanese investors, translating complex technical concepts into accessible narratives that had them nodding enthusiastically. His smile held pride, and something else, something that made my pulse quicken. We ended up on the balcony overlooking the Las Vegas Strip, the neon lights painting the desert in impossible colors. The party continued inside, but out here it was just us and the warm desert breeze. Alexander loosened his bow tie and told me I'd exceeded every expectation. 3 different companies had already reached out to him about partnering specifically because of how I'd presented Sterling Technologies' vision. Then he moved closer, his hand finding mine on the balcony railing. He confessed that when he'd seen me at that rehearsal dinner, watching me maintain dignity in the face of such cruelty, he'd been intrigued. When we'd talked by the lake, he'd been impressed. But tonight, watching me work, seeing my intelligence and charm in action, he was completely captivated. Our first kiss tasted like champagne and possibilities. It wasn't desperate or needy like my relationship with Marcus had become. It was confident, mutual, a meeting of equals who recognized something special in each other. When we finally pulled apart, the Strip's lights seemed brighter, the night more alive with potential. The next morning, room service brought breakfast to my suite, along with Alexander in jeans and a casual shirt, looking younger and more relaxed than I'd seen him. We ate fresh fruit and croissants on the balcony, watching the city wake up below us. Then he proposed something that should have seemed insane, but instead felt like destiny. He suggested we get married, not in some grand romantic gesture, but as a strategic partnership. I was Canadian originally, though I'd been in the States on a work visa that was tied to my old job. Marriage would give me permanent status to work as his PR director without visa complications. For him, it meant having a partner he could trust completely, someone who understood betrayal and wouldn't repeat it. Plus, he admitted with a grin the chemistry between us was undeniable. I knew it was crazy. I'd known this man for less than 72 hours, but I'd known Marcus for 3 years and hadn't really known him at all. Alexander had shown me more honesty, respect, and genuine partnership in 3 days than Marcus had in 3 years. Sometimes the heart knows things the mind takes longer to understand. We drove to the Clark County Courthouse in his white Bentley Continental, the desert sun warming my face through the window. The ceremony was simple, just Alexander and me, with his assistant and driver serving as witnesses. No 200 guests, no $45,000 production, no elaborate dress that cost more than most people's cars. Just two people making a choice to build something together from the ashes of their past disasters. The rings came from Cartier simple platinum bands that Alexander had his assistant procure that morning. Mine had a row of diamonds that caught the light like promises. Together they cost more than my entire cancelled wedding, but there was no showiness to them, just elegant simplicity that felt right. When the justice of the peace pronounced us husband and wife, Alexander's kiss was tender a seal on our unconventional beginning. I texted my parents a photo from the courthouse steps, my smile genuine for the first time in days. My phone immediately rang my mother screaming, but when she heard my voice, heard the happiness in it, her screams turned to joy. She said I sounded like myself again, like the confident woman she'd raised, not the shadow I'd become in Marcus's presence. Our wedding night was spent in the penthouse suite, discovering each other in ways that went beyond physical. We talked until dawn about our dreams, our fears, our plans for Sterling Technologies. The connection was deeper than anything I'd experienced, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it meant to rise from betrayal. When I fell asleep in his arms, I felt safe for the first time in months. We returned to Chicago 3 days after the wedding, and I swear the city looked different through the windows of Alexander's Rolls-Royce Phantom. The driver took us to my old apartment building where a moving company was already packing up my belongings under Jessica's supervision. What I didn't expect was to find Marcus in the lobby with Victoria, apparently having heard through social media that I was back in town. He looked terrible unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes, wearing the same rumpled clothes I'd seen him in 2 days prior. His startup had just lost 3 major investors, all of whom happened to be close associates of Alexander's. It wasn't revenge, Alexander assured me, just business. Once word spread about how Marcus had handled his personal life, investors questioned his professional judgment. Victoria looked equally distressed, her perfect makeup not quite hiding the stress lines around her eyes. She kept checking her phone, and I caught a glimpse of real estate listings. Apparently, the luxury condo Marcus had promised her was no longer affordable since his equity had become worthless. She'd left her own successful career for a man who'd lied about his financial status, and now she was stuck pregnant with a baby whose father was essentially broke. I walked past them to the elevator, Alexander's hand protective on my lower back. But Marcus grabbed my arm, spinning me around, his eyes wild as he saw my wedding ring. The Cartier diamond band caught the lobby lights, and I watched him do the mental math, realizing the timeline, understanding that I'd married his would-be investor. His face went through a series of expressions, from shock to rage to desperate calculation. Jessica emerged from the elevator with a box of my books, took one look at the situation, and set the box down with deliberate calm. She pulled out her phone and showed Marcus something that made his face go white. Screenshots of his dating profiles, his messages to other women during our relationship, all dated and documented. She'd sent them to his company's human resources department that morning, along with evidence that he'd been using the company credit card for his affairs. Marcus's phone rang, and I knew from his expression that it was his boss. He walked away to answer it, his voice getting increasingly desperate as he tried to explain. By the time he hung up, he was unemployed. The startup he'd given everything for, including our relationship, had fired him for misuse of company funds and violation of their morality clause. Victoria turned on him immediately, her voice shrill as she demanded to know how he planned to support their baby now. The facade of the powerful executive she'd fallen for crumbled, revealing a man who'd built his entire identity on lies and borrowed money. She stormed out, her heels clicking angrily on the marble floor, leaving Marcus standing alone in the lobby of the building where we'd once planned our future. That evening, Alexander and I had dinner with my parents at their favourite Italian restaurant. My father shook Alexander's hand with genuine warmth, saying he could tell this one actually deserved me. My mother couldn't stop touching the fabric of my new designer dress, marvelling at how happiness had transformed my appearance in just days. The next morning was my first official day at Sterling Technologies. The headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming tower in downtown Chicago, with my new office taking up a corner of the executive floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, and my name was already on the door in elegant silver lettering: Rebecca Sterling, Chief Public Relations Officer. My first initiative was a complete rebranding campaign that positioned Sterling Technologies as the leader in ethical AI development. Within a month, we'd secured features in Forbes, Wired, and the Wall Street Journal. The company's valuation increased by 30% in my first quarter, with several board members specifically crediting the new PR strategy. Marcus sent 47 emails over the next month, each more desperate than the last. They ranged from begging for forgiveness, to asking for investment in his new venture idea, to threatening to expose the quick timeline of my marriage. Alexander and I read them together over morning coffee, usually laughing at the increasingly ridiculous proposals. The man who'd once made me feel small was now just spam in my inbox. Meanwhile, Victoria had the baby, a girl she named Sophia, the same week she filed for child support that Marcus couldn't afford. His social media, which I checked out of morbid curiosity, became a stream of motivational quotes about rising from failure and the importance of perseverance. The comments were mostly from people who'd been at the rehearsal dinner, none of them supportive. 6 months have passed since that nightmare rehearsal dinner, and I'm writing this from the deck of our Malibu beach house, the one Alexander bought as a surprise for our 6-month anniversary. The Pacific Ocean stretches endlessly before me, and I can hear Alexander inside making breakfast, humming off-key to whatever's playing on his phone. The man who runs board meetings with military precision can't carry a tune to save his life, and I love him for it. Our relationship wasn't instantly perfect just because we'd gotten married. We both carried scars from our previous betrayals that didn't heal overnight. We started couples therapy in our 2nd month, not because we were struggling, but because we wanted to build something lasting. Dr. Martinez helped us understand that our quick connection wasn't impulsive, but rather two people who'd learnt to recognize authenticity when they found it. The therapy sessions revealed things about ourselves we hadn't expected. My tendency to overplan events came from a need to control outcomes after feeling powerless in my childhood. Alexander's workaholic tendencies stemmed from equating success with self-worth after his ex-wife told him he'd never amount to anything. Together we learnt to balance each other, me pulling him away from his laptop for sunset walks, him reminding me that not everything needs to be perfect to be beautiful. My division at Sterling Technologies is now valued at $50 million with a team of 30 working under me. We've revolutionized how tech companies approach public relations, focusing on storytelling that humanizes technology rather than mystifying it. 3 competitors have tried to poach me with offers that would make your head spin, but I'm exactly where I want to be. My parents visit monthly, and my mother has become the queen of bragging to her book club. Her daughter, who married a billionaire CEO, makes for much better gossip than her daughter, who almost married a mediocre middle manager. She's already dropping hints about grandchildren, but this time it feels like possibility rather than pressure. Jessica is now my chief of staff at Sterling Technologies. Her salary doubled from what she made at her old nonprofit. She's dating Alexander's CFO, a kind man named William, who treats her like she hung the moon. We sometimes laugh about how Marcus's betrayal led to both of us finding better lives than we could have imagined. As for Marcus, he works at a small accounting firm in the suburbs, making $60,000 a year and driving a 10-year-old Honda. His Instagram stories about entrepreneurship and resilience get maybe 12 views. Victoria took him to court 3 times for missed child support payments before garnishing his wages directly. The golden boy who was going to make it big is now just another guy with a failed startup story and a baby he sees every other weekend. But here's the thing, I don't feel vindication when I think about Marcus's downfall. I don't feel satisfied seeing Victoria struggle as a single mother. I don't even feel angry anymore. What I feel is indifference, which I've learned is the opposite of love. The person who once held my entire future in his hands has become just a footnote in my success story, exactly as Alexander had predicted that night by the lake. The real victory isn't in their failure, but in my elevation. Every morning, I wake up next to a man who sees me as an equal partner, who celebrates my victories as enthusiastically as his own, who trusts me with his empire, because he knows I'll help him build it bigger. We're planning our real wedding for next year, though this time I'm paying for everything myself from my bonuses and stock options. It'll be intimate, maybe 50 people who actually matter on the beach in Malibu at sunset. Alexander just brought me coffee prepared exactly how I like it and kissed my forehead before settling into the chair beside me with his own mug and tablet. We have a board meeting in 3 hours where we'll announce Sterling Technologies' acquisition of a major competitor, a deal I helped negotiate by winning over their skeptical CEO. But for now, we're just two people who found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something beautiful. My phone buzzes with another message from Marcus. Without reading it, I block his number and turn to my husband. The man who showed me that sometimes rejection is divine protection, that the worst moments can become launching pads for greatness. He asks if I'm ready for the board meeting, calling me Mrs. Sterling with that slight smile that still makes my heart race. The truth I've learned is this: your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see it. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Don't seek revenge, seek elevation. Success isn't the best revenge, it's the best gift you can give yourself. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person who breaks your heart is simply clearing the path for the one who'll help you build an empire. As we head inside to prepare for our meeting, I think about that woman crying by Lake Michigan 6 months ago, convinced her life was over. If only she could see herself now running PR for a billion-dollar company, married to a man who respects and adores her, living a life that exceeds every dream she'd been too afraid to imagine. The wedding that wasn't became the beginning that was meant to be. So if you're watching this and you've ever had your heart shattered, ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, ever felt like your world was ending, remember my story. Remember that sometimes the plot twist you didn't see coming is the one that changes everything for the better. The universe might just be removing the wrong person to make room for the right one, and your breakdown might just be the breakthrough in disguise. What betrayal have you turned into triumph? What rejection became your redirection? Drop a comment below and share your story of rising from the ashes. Like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of transformation, and share it with someone who needs to hear that their current ending might just be their new beginning. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the best thing that can happen is the wedding that doesn't. May your plot twists lead to better stories than the ones you originally planned.